Bruce Percy, nice to see you again. How are you?
I'm fine, Alistair. How are you doing yourself?
Not too bad. It's about a year, I think, since we last had a face-to-face video chat, but we've been catching up quite a lot in
Hmm.
between. And one of the main reasons we're having a bit of a chat today is that you have a new book coming out. In fact, it is out because I have it here. So I thought we might cover a little bit about that so that the audience can get a feel for the project and what it is and where they can buy one should they wish to do so. So the book is called The Sound of Snow, which is a very intriguing title. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about that to get started with?
Yeah, I suppose I'm on book number. I've lost count now, but I think it might be book number 6 or 7. And every book that we've done for the last 2 or 3 books, whatever, has been a one-word title. And I just got to the point where I thought I just don't want to put a book out that just says Iceland or Altiplano. And last year's Iceland book, we managed to find an alternative to that. So I was looking for an Icelandic word that sounded good, but it was still kind of almost recognizable in English.
Hmm.
So we found Halendi, which basically just means highlands. And I thought brilliant because it's not a million miles away. You can get it. And then this year we were kind of struggling with the idea of. I just said to Darren that that design books with. I just don't want to call it Hokkaido. It's just such a predictable, very boring kind of title.
Hmm.
And I've got one of my clients. One of the beauties about what we do, uh, I would say, is that we get to meet people from all different walks of life and backgrounds and professions and things. And so I've made friends with somebody in London who's been married twice to two different Japanese ladies and lived
All
in
right.
lived in Japan, and he's still friends with his ex partners. And I was just saying to him about. He wrote to me one day and he said to me that his Emmy, his partner, had said to him that she'd always liked the title "The Sound of Snow." And I got to thinking about this, and I thought, well, it's quite poetic. And when you are there, I've often found that when you're out photographing in snow conditions and things like that, the atmosphere gets more closed in. It gets more intimate. You can kind of all the sound stops reverberating. Everything that's far away just gets muted,
Hmm.
and it becomes a much more intimate thing. And then because there's a reduction in your visual input as well, because sometimes you're just working in whiteout conditions and things like that. I really like working in really kind of inclement weather if I can. So everything's getting reduced down, and I really like this idea because I thought, well, when you're walking into a landscape on your own, after a while, all you can hear is their footsteps on the
Hmm.
snow going in. And so I just loved this, and so I just said to him, "Well, would you mind if I stole this title from you?" And well, he said, "Well, it's Emmy's, so she's actually got a credit in the book."
Right.
So it actually says book title, and it says Emmy Watanabe,
Okay.
and then Clive gets a mention too. He'll probably be really chuffed just now to hear that he's been mentioned, but Clive got a mention too because it's something that I think is really important is always to recognise where you've gotten your inspiration or influences from. So that's where the title came from, and so it was two things. One of it was I was looking for something that was just very different from titles that we'd used in previous books, and I was looking for something that was quite beautiful
Hmm.
too. And I just thought the title, "The Sound of Snow," it's kind of an interesting thing because you wouldn't think that snow has a sound, but I think it does. I think that when you're out in those landscapes, like I said, everything just gets much more muted. The reverberations. I don't know if people are so aware of that. My background is audio engineering a long, long time ago, and I think that I'm a bit more focused in those sorts of things.
Hmm.
I sort of pick up on ambiences a bit more. But I think most of us that are landscape photographers, that's one of the reasons why we're there. It's not just what we're seeing; it's also how we're feeling about it.
Right. Well,
Mm.
yeah, as any conversation that I tend to have on this channel, every word that you say leads down numerous
Mm.
rabbit holes that we can go and explore. And there's a couple there that I'd like to come back to later on. So the book, The Sound of Snow, is uh, a portfolio of images from Hokkaido,
Mm.
essentially in winter. I think
That's right.
I think you pretty much only go in the winter,
Yes.
and I've said about this before with you, and I hope you don't take this as too. I hope that you're going to get too cringy with this. I've always said that anything that comes from you with your name on it means it's a high quality product, and I've always said, I just every time we open one of your books, it's just such a beautiful thing.
Well,
So
thanks very much, Alistair. I mean, it's really nice that you say those things to me all the time. I'm utterly convinced that you say them to everybody. But
oh, I do.
I
But all my friends are talented.
right. But it's one of the things I think when you're producing books. I mean, one of the questions is why produce books, and for me, it's the concept, it's the whole thing, and then. We did an interview. Darren and myself did an interview with Ewan Ross, who's got this fantastic website called Biblioscapes, where he just goes and interviews people about their photographic books that they've made, whether it's Paul Wakefield all the way through up to some pretty really famous names, and the thing that I thought was interesting about it was I got a lot of feedback from people saying I had no idea just how much work goes into putting the book together. And I said, yeah, we angst over the cloth type, the fonts, and then everything's just slow because you've always got to wait to hear back whether you can get a particular cloth in a particular country, and trying to match the right kind of color that you're looking for. And then I always get in the way as well because I usually end up sending Darren this is how I want the book to look.
Yeah.
And then he's very, very diplomatic. He's able to do it in such a way that he can take what I've done and just make it much better. And then I look at it and go, yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. right? So there's a lot of care put into this, and we spend a lot of time thinking about the cloth colors, the fonts, the layout, the sequencing, the text, everything, even how much text we put in the book. And so I think personally the reason why every photographer out there, if you're interested in photography of any kind of form, whether it's landscape or portrait or anything, is that we should all be buying books because it's an experience. Definitely. It's a bit like you can watch a movie on the TV, but going to the cinema is a different experience.
Right.
And looking at somebody's pictures on a website only takes you so far. But when you actually pick up a book and go through it, there's a story unfolding in that whole thing. I think.
I love the sort of tangible nature of them. I mean, Ann Kristin and I have hundreds of books, and it's a really important thing for us is to buy books. Now you kindly sent me, this is the standard edition that you sent me.
Yes.
So that I could see.
That was basically because I was just so pleased with the colour of it. When it actually turned up, I thought, yeah, that's really beautiful. And you'd ordered the sort of deluxe from me, which was really nice of you to do it.
This is the version I've got, which is the deluxe version, which has a rather handsome hard case and comes with one of your prints.
Yes, just a point about that. If the envelope and the colour of that, the sort of wine colour of that envelope is also the same colour as the end papers in the book. I know that sounds like a subtle thing, and maybe some people don't even know what an end paper is, but yes, on the white one. And these are the things that we spend time thinking about, and for a lot of people that might just be something that just goes completely over their heads, and then for some people it isn't. You'll get feedback from people that have written to you, and they'll just say everything just seems to be coordinated.
Exactly. And
you go, absolutely. And I've been saying this for a very long time, that everything, if you're a photographer, you are a visual artist. And so everything that you do that is visual should have the same care and attention to it, whether it's your website, whether it's your business card. I think I said this to you last year. Everything. And I do find it very interesting that when I really like somebody's work, if I go and get the book and there's not really been so much care and attention done to the layout or the fonts on it, you ask yourself why. That's an interesting thing. And so one of the things I really like about Ansel Adams books, actually, I remember when I first they're probably the very first books I ever bought, the cloth ones. Those Sierra Nevada publishing thingy, when you went through them, they all had a very sort of classical kind of style about them. And I kind of replicated on the very first book I did, The Art of Adventure. I said to Darren at the time that I kind of wanted to go with that format. It had a classical look about it. And then with Mr. Kenna's books as well, you know, all those well, it doesn't even matter with Michael's books, but even with like all the Nazreli books, if you go and look at them, you just know they're Nazreli books. There's a sort of, there's a vibe going on.
Right.
And a branding, if you like. I mean, I really hate using the word branding because it just makes it sound like it's a commodity of some kind, where I think there's a lot of care and attention, and there's an artistic flair about the design of the Nazreli books.
Right.
And this is something that Darren and myself are trying to do with all the books that we've come out with the last 2 or 3. We're trying to make them relatively consistent.
No, and like I said, I mean, they're super impressive to the point where when it came time for me to start doing my book, you kindly introduced me to Darren as well. So he's doing all the design work for ours, for mine rather. Now, we'll cover just a few of the little technicalities first before we get back into the sort of more the concept, and you've mentioned Michael Kenna already, and I think it's worth raising that at some point in the near future as well. There's 3 editions of this, isn't there? There's the standard, the deluxe, and then there's a collector's edition.
Yeah,
and you're self-publishing. You're not you're doing this all through your own distribution.
That's right. It's you know, it's kind of an ironic thing about this, because these things are really a labour of love to do the book. It's not like you do them because you're going to get rich from them. You're really not going to. And as a commercial photographer, if I was trying to make an income, I would just go and run some workshops or something instead. But there's just something very beautiful about doing a conceptual thing, and also it's a really good way of just completing work off. And I never. I got sent a questionnaire yesterday from somebody that wants me, who's busy trying to do a book where he's interviewing a bunch of different photographers, and some of the questions were very much focused from the point of view about why, what are the criteria when you start a project. And I was basically just saying I don't start a project, I just start making photographs, and then if there's a concept or a project, it always comes much later. It's not that you go out there to try and make something happen, it's just that things start to happen, and then you find that you've got a body of work and you realise there's something in it. But I suppose after 10 years of doing this, when you're running workshops and you've got a schedule every year where you're hitting Hokkaido every January, and you know you're going to be doing this for 6 years, that you can already see, join the dots, and you know, well, if I'm going to Hokkaido every 6 years later, it just seems obvious that there's going to be a book coming out of this now. So right. So those things are less of a surprise. And Darren and myself we had this on a roadmap for about the last 5 years. We knew we were going to do Altoplano, then we knew we were going to do Halendi, and we also knew that we were going to do the Hokkaido book. And Darren even designed all the slipcases like about 3 years ago as a conceptual thing, so they all fitted together. And the thing that I found very interesting about this, and I wonder if this is something that you feel about yourself, Alistair, but I always feel that my audience, they're always a step behind me in terms of where you're going next. So like every year I'll get somebody saying to me, Bruce, I really want to come to Japan with you in 2025 or something. Yeah. And you think, I don't even know if I'll be going to Hokkaido in 20, because I've done it so many times now. So you realise that some of your audience, they think that you're going to keep on doing the same thing all the time, but you're actually moving forward.
Right.
And certainly with the books, when we finally got round to doing Altoplano, the images were now bordering on, the oldest ones were about 10 years old, and the youngest ones were about 4.
Right.
And so now I feel that we've just played catch up. And Halendi last year was getting really close to, this is my current style. And Hokkaido, I think, is just, we're now up to the present day of what I do, photographically speaking, because I think my style's changed quite a bit over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I can see that, most definitely. I mean, I've been following your work for, well, probably as long as you've been doing it, actually. I remember discovering your work really, really early on, particularly your West of Scotland stuff, from a Sin to Egg and places like that.
Yeah, it's so weird, because when the style started off, I was a Galen Rowell fan, and when I look at the earlier stuff, it's got all those very strong colours that his work is, and the high contrasts and everything. And you don't try and orchestrate anything. Things just tend to happen, and you're just floating down a river. and you're just wondering where it's going to take you next. And then if somebody had said to me 10 years ago that your work is going to become extremely muted, initially it was, for me, it was simplifying, reducing the number of objects in the picture, and then it's all about quality of light, and then it was color reduction. And now I'm sort of feeling like the pendulum's starting to swing the other way, and I'm sort of wondering if, now that I've gone as far as I personally think I can go with this minimalism thing of, it's not a term that I would use myself, but I'm very aware that the pictures have been reduced so much now that I'm sort of wondering if that just as a matter of just freshness and change, that I'm going to start reintroducing color more into what I do. I don't know, and this is the beauty about it, is that we never know about what's going to happen next, but it's all about just keeping our minds open and seeing.
Are you still predominantly shooting Velvia?
Yeah, I do, and that's a funny question. I usually the question that comes after that one is, if your pictures are so muted, why don't you use a film that's got less color?
No, see, that wasn't going to be my question.
All right, okay.
No,
I'm not saying it was, but I was just going to say that.
No, because the beauty of Velvia is that for those snowy minimalistic images, there's a slight tone to it. There's a slight. Yeah. No, I'm not going to say color cast, but the way it treats shadow detail in particular.
Oh no, I would say that that's probably true. That there's a very pronounced color cast in Velvia, and it's
I was being kind.
Yeah, well, I don't even think the film's remotely realistic, and it's one of the reasons why I like it, because usually when you get the films back and you put them on the light table, it's a great delight if you're actually surprised. If you go and look at it and go, oh, I didn't think it was going to look like that. I really like this. And I think over the 10 years, I was really bad at sort of reading colour, I think. And I think colour awareness is on a sliding scale for a lot of people. You've got some people out there that love the really high saturated work that's out there. And then there's other people out there that like the really, really muted stuff, and everything in between. And looking back at myself now, I just personally, from me anyway, I just don't think I was really that aware of colour when I started photographing, and it really had to be shouting at you in the pictures. And now it's gotten to the point where when I've been working on images for a while, the colour's too much, and I've reduced it down, and then I go out the room to go make a cup of tea, come back in, and I'm looking at the images on the monitor, and I'm thinking, they look black and white now. and then I put the black and white layer on and go, no, because you need a reference point, and you go, right. Oh no, that's black and white.
Yeah.
Oh yes, there's still colour, but you're starting off with very colourful images, and the problem with Velvia is it's got a very pronounced blue cast.
Yes.
In the shadows, and one of the things that I think's really interesting about my own perception is I've been teaching myself to be able to understand colour better, and sometimes I'm actually spending a lot of time ironing out any colour casts in the shadows.
Right.
Sometimes you want them. Sometimes you want, like, if you've got a fairly monochromatic picture, you might have dark blue shadows in it, so it gives a perception of depth to the picture, but you still perceive it as fairly monochromatic. And other times it's the other way around, where you've got a very colourful picture, but somehow it's really vitally important that the blacks are completely neutral.
Right, and I think this is something we can talk about forever, is colour perception, and because it's something that I'm super into. In fact, I've even written a book about it. But in fact, I'm going to come back a little bit to colour in a short while. I want to talk a little bit about Michael Kenna, because Michael's been around for quite a while. I think we've got at least 3 of his books on the shelves through there. And I remember when I talked to you first about this project in particular, because Hokkaido has Michael has quite a strong association with Hokkaido.
Yes.
You felt that you were, because we all stand on the shoulders of giants.
That's right.
And I almost felt when we initially talked about this face to face that you were thinking more that you were walking in the footsteps of giants.
It's an interesting subject, this one, because nothing is original. Nothing's 100% wholly original. If originality comes from anything, it's usually about a mixture of blending all your inspirations together, all your influences together. So if you and especially if I look at Michael's work, I can see Bill Brandt in it, and he's
Yes.
fully acknowledged this. He's fully acknowledged where his influences are coming from. Joseph Sudek from Prague, and even the toning, particularly in Michael's work, all the Brandt stuff. If you go and look at any Bill Brandt images, and the toning of them, Michael just this is what Michael does.
Right.
And what I think's really good about it is that he's completely comfortable with this, and he's also completely realistic about where he starts and where his influences begin and end as well. And I think there's something about that. I think there's something very instructional about if you can really get a good handle of where you really are in what you're doing, how much of what you're doing is certain influences, and you can pinpoint them and say, yeah, I know that this is. And I used to get people 10 years ago saying to me, you're like a colour version of Michael Kenna, and I still think it's a huge compliment. And every time I've listened to him talk about it, he's also said that you can learn so much by following in the footsteps of other people. You can go, even going along to take that classic picture that Ansel did of, tunnel view in Yosemite. You can learn so much when you get there. And I've noticed as a workshops teacher that some of my clients want to ask this. They'll say to me, can you take me to the place where you made this shot? Yeah. And initially I was very resistant of that because I felt that they should really be trying to find their own style, which I still believe in. But there is something very instructional about going along and showing them, because usually when they get there, they kind of go, oh God, it's nothing like I expected it to look like. And when you actually show them about how far you had the camera away from certain foreground subjects, they go, I didn't realize you were that close.
Right.
So things like that. And where I suppose I draw the line on it is, it's of no interest for me just to go around the world photographing, a composition that everybody else has done, or a really famous place the same way that everybody else has done it. And so it was kind of a tricky one for me going to Hokkaido, because it was Michael that put me in touch with his guide.
Yes.
And because it just looks so beautiful, you just know you have to go. Mm. And when I got there, you're thinking, oh my goodness, it's really hard to get away from what he's done there. It's just everywhere you look. and even a friend of mine who from the Czech Republic, Marek, said to me this last year, he hired the same guide, and he said, I lost my clothing in the flight over. And Michael's guide in Japan actually has a spare set of everything for Michael if Michael gets off the plane and it's not there. And Michael's pretty tall. Okay. And Marek's pretty tall, so he said I was walking around in Michael's boots and everything for the couple of days, and he said I didn't feel very comfortable about it. He said because it wasn't just that. He said when you look around the landscape, it's really hard to get away from what he's done there. Yeah. And it is. And I think I have to admit, I think that every time I go to Hokkaido, I feel like a fanboy. Mm-hmm. And it's great, but at the same time, I'm not interested in making the exact same compositions that Michael's done or anything. And usually, and his guide knows this, because he knows the first thing I'll ask is, has Michael been here? And he'll say no, and I'll say great, because I'm not interested in even just overlapping on it. And but I think I've done something that's a bit different from it, but it's definitely been influenced by him. I mean, I just would never have gone to Hokkaido without him showing me all that work that he did. When I first saw the Hokkaido work, it was about 20 years ago.
Mm. But this is true in so many different art forms. I mean, it's like you say, I'm a guitar player, you're a synthesizer, keyboard player predominantly. And we're all influenced by, whether it's various guitar players, whether it's Joe Satriani or Steve Vai or Alex Lifeson or David Gilmour or whoever. And you can't play keyboards without being influenced by a whole bunch of other keyboards.
That's right. Yeah.
And in music, we only have 12 notes. We have.
Well, I think that it comes down to honesty. It's all about how much you just genuinely know that you went somewhere. I think it's okay if you go and photograph Joe Cornish's Elgol Boulder without even knowing. If you'd never even seen his picture and you just happen to get the same composition, then that's fine, kind of thing. And even if you want to go there and actually want to work through the process of doing what Joe did, it's usually. It's a learning experience, but I just think we're living in an age now where the standards are now higher for photography. I think that, like, I remember in the film days before digital came along, you were lucky if you got a really good exposure out of a roll of film.
Mm.
And then if you actually got a really good exposure with a really good composition mixed in at the same time on the same negative, you were just like, oh, this is like the best shot I've taken this year.
Yeah.
And so I think the bar has been risen in that way. And it's not that I'm trying to say that anything should be a competition or anything. I'm not interested in that. But in terms of photography, should be it should be engaging, and there should be something individualistic coming out of it. So when we go somewhere, it's really about trying to find what you see when you're there,
Right.
and about your vision, about what do you feel when you're there, and yeah. So that's the closest I've ever come, because I have to say that everything that I've done previously, I've usually just gone somewhere. Things have changed so much in 10 years. I remember when I was going to Lofoten. At the time, there was nobody really going there. There were a couple of tours every year, but it wasn't like the thing it is now.
Mm.
Or the south coast of Iceland, particularly the Black Beach with the diamond bergs on it and stuff. And I remember putting a newsletter at one point, and with a bunch of pictures from that, and I got tons of emails from people saying, "Wow, where is that place?"
Yeah.
And it's just interesting to note that you can go from where is that place to everybody going, "Come on, everybody knows where that place is."
So, good.
So,
I've always wanted to know whose fault it was.
well, it's not. I'm not saying it's my fault or anything, or
I
that I was there first or anything. But it's just it's getting harder. It's getting harder to go, and yet there's millions of places that I've just never even been touched upon. And also, it's kind of interesting when you go somewhere and you see everybody all grouping around the same sort of like honeypot spot, and you think, I would just love to see landscape photography of the year competition one year where somebody wins it from taking a picture of a rubbish tip. That would just be great.
Yeah.
Because it would just illustrate the point that, a great photograph can be anywhere. It doesn't have to. And they do try and I think they make a lot of effort to try and make sure that it's not the classic Elgol shot or the classic store shot that wins every year, because it's their responsibility, I suppose, is to try and shaking it up a bit more and say, well, there's other avenues out there rather than these kind of classic landscape shots, and I still think that most of the world has not been photographed well.
Right.
Yeah.
Hokkaido, there seems to me as if there's some kind of, it's almost like parentheses, as if you've put some brackets around the first 20 years of your creative photography, in that it seems to me that some people develop a style or are more influenced by their cultural aesthetic. So you grow up in the UK, you grow up in Western Europe, so you understand that Da Vinci and Leonardo and Monet and Rembrandt and etc. are masterful artists, and we have an aesthetic that's associated with our culture and where we grow up in our education, where we grow up. Because you have people that grow up in the UK who they have a very clear cultural aesthetic, whereas people who grow up in Japan and China have a completely different cultural aesthetic, spaciousness, atmosphere, minimalism, those sorts of concepts, which are less common in Western art. Now, it seems to me that your innate aesthetic, so something that's less linked to culture and your society that you grew up in, it seems to me that your innate aesthetic somehow resonates less with a Western societal aesthetic and more with an Eastern aesthetic.
Yeah, that's it probably is true. Just to go back to Stephen Feinstein's comment to me when he said, "Bruce, you seem to go anywhere in the world and take the same picture." I was thinking you might be heading that way and saying that rather than sort of like, oh, he's grown up in Scotland, so he's taking these kind of very
red tin photographs,
or just pictures of Scotland, but in a particular way. I've actually found, in some ways, I've had to leave Scotland for 10 years, and I just wonder now that I've learnt all this other stuff and all these other landscapes, that coming back to Scotland now, I just feel like I've actually got the tool set now to work with it, because it's such a complicated landscape. It's really, really complex, and there's an awful lot going on in there. And so in some ways I kind of feel like I've had a bit of an apprenticeship in all these other places. I do think that Altiplano taught me about how to reduce things, and then the interior of Iceland, and also the black beaches and things in Iceland. There are all studies on just like how you don't actually need an awful lot of color.
Right.
And then Hokkaido has just been this kind of like simplification of just like elegance. I'm really into this kind of thing about elegance and beauty if I can get it. But the cultural thing is very interesting because I did wonder about this. I thought, the chances of I'm in awe of people who live on the edge of some amazing national park, and you can think they can go in every day of the year whenever they want to. So they've got, and you've only got 2 weeks. You go to photograph something in the four corners of America, but you've only got your 2 weeks. We don't live there, you and I. And somehow we're going to have to try and create work that people are going to really resonate with or something. I think, God, it's a really tall thing to try and pull off. And if you can actually at least if you can go there and actually photograph something that's inherently you, rather than trying to make great classic images of some Nevada desert or something, then you've probably got more chance of doing something that works for you. So I think for me it's just that everywhere I go there's an aesthetic that I'm looking for every time I go, regardless of whether I am, and it's been very convenient in the way that the pictures are less about where I actually was and it's more about my style.
I
And
want to challenge you. I just want to challenge you a little bit there because you and I both enjoy this word play thing, and I just want to challenge the word look for, where you said this is what you look for when you go to somewhere, and I can't see you looking for it. In my mind, my impression of your relationship with the landscape is more of a recognition. It's less of a, oh, I'm looking for that.
that's right. I suppose that, yeah, you don't go looking. Probably might convey a contrivance in the way that you've decided what you're looking for and you're going to go looking for it. So it's not in that way. It's certainly in the way that when you find the thing when you're finding the thing that is the right thing, you just know it.
Find the thing that you weren't looking for.
It's kind of true. It's kind of, that old. I don't know how much of this is true, but the statement about Steve Jobs just said that if you do market research with most people, they won't tell you what they want because they don't know what they want until you show it to them.
Right.
And it's the same sort of idea as that, is that I don't know what I'm looking for until I see it.
Right.
And then when I see it, it's just, that's when I know. I go, yeah, look at that. Wow.
I've got a special discount on a bulk buy of the word recognition if you would like to consider a purchase.
But it is a very interesting thing, and that also comes down to, I'm really fascinated in that, in the way that if Apple had decided to make a phone based on customer research, they would have had a physical keyboard bolted onto it.
Yeah.
And I remember watching all the time before the phone was announced, all these kind of websites with mock-ups of what they thought. Every one of them had a bolted keyboard on it. And I also find it's really interesting that when you put something out there that's different and original, or it's just different and nobody else saw it coming, it's now public property, and it's very, very quickly becomes commonplace. So I think within a year, everybody would just say it's quite obvious how you design a phone.
Yeah.
And I also think the certain thing about certain landscapes, I get people telling me that when you get to certain locations, it's quite obvious that's what you do when you go there. And I'm saying that, but if you'd never ever seen any photographs of this before, would you have said that? And I really beg to differ on that one.
Mm.
So this thing about originality is just it loses its currency or value extremely quickly. The moment it's published, it becomes public knowledge, and it's up for, and it's, as it should be, it's up for. But I think it's very difficult to do something. I don't know where I'm going with this. Why am I telling you this? But it's just
I don't know. I'm just enjoying the ride.
well, just in terms of, like, I don't want to go looking for certain particular things, but I suppose I do now know that there's certain kind of landscapes that I'm probably more attracted to than others now. So give me a desert.
I mean that's an increasing the probability of finding aesthetics that are going to be
Well,
harmonious.
well, or a style, and I also have a theory about style that maybe style's not a great thing to have either at times because it can become golden handcuffs. That
Mm.
you start to refine your like the no disrespect to Brian Ferry, Roxy Music, but I just think that the more his albums went on, they got so more and more refined and perfected that the sound was just so. But they were bordering on boring. I thought personally, they just started to get to the point where I'm thinking that I'm he's really honed this craft down now, and we just know that's what you're going to get from Brian Ferry. But being Brian Ferry is just like, it's. I remember somebody saying something like about some really famous artist. Oh, he's a one-trick pony, and I thought, yes, but what an amazing one-trick pony.
That's right.
So
What an amazing trick.
there's that thing about style that if you find it, but at some point it can be a bit kind of limiting in the way that maybe you want to break out of that style, or maybe people are always expect that certain thing from you, or that you find that you're being drawn to other things. And maybe if I stuck myself in a jungle, I'd really hate shooting the interior forests, for example.
Right.
I find them too messy.
Mm.
But maybe it would be a really good thing for me to make sure that when lockdown ends, you can only go and photograph forests,
Yeah.
because it might be a growing thing for me. So
Right. Well, whatever comes from you next, I'm sure it's going to be exciting, and I'm always eager to see what comes out of your mind and through your camera eye. It's
me
always
too.
well, that's right, and it's the same myself. Is that there's an awful lot of serendipity and just spontaneity
Oh,
and
the
stuff.
serendipity thing's really important. I think it's just about going with the cues and the invitations and stuff. I've had so many people just saying, "Do you want to?" So, a friend of mine said to me about coming to Korea. I went to
Yeah.
Seoul, and I saw nothing there. I thought the day I landed there, I thought I will see nothing. I will get nothing. And about 10 days later, I just said to him, I've shot 18 rolls of film, so I must have got something, because I only ever shoot if I'm really interested in it.
Yeah.
I said, I can't put my finger on any of it, and then when I actually edited the work, I thought, I'd never even thought I was going to get anything when I'd seen
Right.
how urbanized it was.
Yeah.
But those things are important. You get invitations, everything like that. I think that I'm not really into cosmic ordering, and I'm not this kind of hippie or anything, but I do believe that there's some sort of we there are avenues. There are avenues, and sometimes it's just about whether we're receptive enough to actually go down that avenue and see what's there.
It's all about
And
openness, acceptance, and non-judgment.
that's right. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
basically, you're a hippie.
Yeah, probably.
Right. I think we'll wrap it up there for this little session. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Bruce. It's I enjoy them immensely. So thanks very much for your
Well,
time
thanks
as
again,
always.
Alistair. Yep.
And if for anyone who wants to dig into The Sound of Snow, highly recommended. Available in all good brucepercy.co.uk websites near you.
Well, thanks, Alistair.
No
And
problem.
good talking to you. And I really like the idea that you're trying to develop, or you are developing these kind of focusing more on this kind of personal development, and particularly about this kind of listening to your own language, about what is it you just said and what was the motivation behind what you said. I think it's all good stuff. I think when it
we,
comes
we,
to your
we live
work.
inside our own heads for,
Yeah,
for the entire duration of our lives. And it's not always the healthiest place for us
yeah,
to inhabit, as you and I both well know. And I think photography can be a catalyst. It's an externalization of that internal landscape. And I think this is where a lot of that resonance and recognition in the landscape is seeing something outside that takes you out of yourself.
yeah.
That,
That's
that
true.
that's a very powerful thing. So yeah, that's very much the focus of my work. But there's an aesthetic that marries to those emotional landscapes and emotional spectrums, I guess I call them. So yeah, it's a life's work for me, I think, and I'm excited about each new day because there's new revelations come. And when I speak to someone like yourself, who's obviously so well versed and has thought about so many of these things, it's an education for me as well.
Absolutely. I'll just finish with a quote from Brian Eno that I read. I listened to him in an interview many years ago. Brian Eno was, whoever, for people who don't know, he's a musician that was really famous for producing U2's Achtung Baby album. And he's usually like a musician that people hire in when they've got problems with their creativity. And I was listening to him, and he just said that you sometimes find as a teacher that you find yourself saying something that you didn't know that you knew.
Right.
And I just think it's an amazing thing. The amount of times that you go, And it's just,
Right.
even just as for anybody else out there, just sitting down and trying to explain to other people what you're doing, you will find yourself saying things about your work that you didn't even know that you even had thoughts
Well,
on.
and it's also one of the more recognized steps in formal education is theory, practice, reflection, and part of that delivery to another student or a peer or a fellow,
Oh, right, okay.
an associate, that explanation is part of your demonstration of understanding. But you're right, the language that we use, some of it just spontaneously arises in our minds, which is why talking and conversations is a form of creativity.
Mm-hmm.
So talking is a good thing to do, sharing is a good thing to do, bouncing off each other is a good thing to do. So the in terms of what's in it for me, it's 2 hours of free education,
Yeah.
in terms of a great conversation with someone I've got a lot of respect for. So thanks
Oh, well,
again.
thanks very much. Thanks,
No bother.
Alistair. Right.